Well, welcome everybody. I want to ask you a few questions. First of all, who was at the November conference? Who's heard some of what I've talked about before? Not many, okay. Well, for those who were, I'm not repeating myself vastly, but there are a couple of foundational things that I will mention. Who has a stressful job? Anybody? Oh, okay. Who has leaders that have stressful jobs? Okay. How many of you have sort of formal strategies for how you deal with stress? Yeah, there's virtually no hands up. Now, there's often a few, and we get things like, well, I exercise, and I'll be talking about the things you can do later. Some people do mindfulness training. Excuse me, I have a cold, by the way, so if I suddenly have a sneezing fit, I'll try not to do it into the microphone. But we don't tend to think about how do we manage stress. And this is my specialist subject, if you like. And when I did the research for my doctorate, I met 2 CEOs out of about 100 who said, I'm never affected by stress. It's just a fact of life in organizations. And that's because our brains are fairly primitive still compared to what we expect of them in the world of work today. So this should be making a noise and doing something. This is deliberately noisy because this is how we try to work. We're constantly on aeroplanes, we're flying, we have mobile phones all the time, we're concentrating on targets, on money, on things that are not really very important to our primitive brains. And it's noisy and it leads to cognitive overload. Hopefully your brains don't do that too often, but the point is cognitive overload actually affects our ability to be creative, to make good quality decisions, and neuroscience kind of tells us why this is. And the reason I took my job, because I had a perfectly nice life before I took this job, was I got really excited about the fact that neuroscience gives HR and talent leaders the answers of why the things we know about authenticity and reward mechanisms and engagement strategies, neuroscience kind of tells us why it is that they work. And that's quite appealing when you're working with senior execs who are focused on targets, because it's like, why should we do this stuff? We've got to get on with the day job. Well, actually, neuroscience gives us those answers. So these are some of the things that we ask leaders to do in organizations, in addition to their day job. And it's quite a lot, actually, when you think about it. And there's certain key areas that you can make a lot of difference if you do them well, and actually make it worse if you do them badly. So, for instance, performance management. How many of you have rating systems in your performance management? Okay. Well, our research says they don't work. So we are doing research we've got a faculty of over 50 neuroscientists globally. Most of them are based in New York. But everything in it tells us that rating people against each other actually creates threat in the brain. When we have threat going on in our brains, we can't think, we can't make decisions, and I'll be coming to that later. We're working with a lot of organizations who are very sophisticated in their performance management systems, and we don't claim to have all the answers for a corporate, but what we would say is the important thing to engage people is to have lots of quality conversations rather than annual or quarterly reviews, because they just set you up for people to feel threatened. Breaking bias is another big area around diversity and inclusion. If I give you an example, if I was to teach you all about the pancreas and I was to show you a diagram and I was to go into it in real detail and you studied really hard, and I said, right, you know all about the pancreas now, don't you? Yes. Now go away and produce more insulin. How successful do you think you would be? You wouldn't, would you? Well, it's the same thing with bias. You know, don't be racist, don't be sexist. It's not conscious, therefore it's very difficult to control as a human being. So what organizations need to do is put in mitigating strategies. So they're just two of the things that we focus on that's got some fascinating research. And if anyone wants articles on those, I can give them to you. But what we're focusing on today is my favourite subject, which is resilience and well-being. And the reason that it's my favourite subject is if leaders can't self-regulate, they won't be able to help their people regulate. So it's really important to have these strategies for when you are feeling under par, when you are overloaded, when you have just got off a plane. And I think there's some people from America here today that got in yesterday. I know when I get back from the States, I'm absolutely useless for a couple of days. It takes me a while to get back in. Excuse me. Okay, so these are the key parts of the brain. Some of you may recognize these. Basically, there's three parts, really. There's the reptilian brain, which is at the base of your brain, and that's really responsible for keeping us alive. It's the oldest part, and it's the bit that helps us breathe and digest and things like that. Then there's the limbic system in the midbrain region, and this is sometimes known as the emotional center of the brain. And then finally, there's the cortex, which is the outer part of the brain. This is the only sort of technical bit, really, that you need to worry about, but it is useful to know. Right in the front of your brain is a very thin part called the prefrontal cortex. Now, the prefrontal cortex is very easily overloaded. So you can, if you are in a job where you go from meeting to meeting to meeting, and you do all your focused work in the evening on the train, or you're multitasking the whole time, it can't cope. So that's the cognitive overload problem. But the other problem is when we're stressed, there's a little part in here. Can you see that sort of little horn with the round bit? That's called your amygdala. The amygdala does what's called an amygdala hijack. It takes over, the limbic system takes over, and shuts down your PFC. So that's when someone's in a meeting or they're doing a presentation, they suddenly go blank. The amygdala has taken over. They're entirely driven by their emotion. Lights are on, but no one's home. So they have no idea at that point what you're talking about. You might as well go home. Anyone ever been there, where you just feel like nothing's coming through and you can't think straight? That's because your amygdala's taken over. So, yeah, that just says the same thing. The other important thing there is the inhibit, and I'm going to come on to that in a bit, but actually the part of your brain that is most useful for controlling your emotional response to a stressful situation lives in the PFC. So guess what? If you don't get hold of yourself quickly, it's shut down, and then you can't self-regulate. So the best thing to do is take a break, go away, calm down. Excuse me. Well, that's just a nice little example of what happens when the limbic system takes over. So the Scalf model is the foundational model that we work with that was developed by David Rock. And is anyone familiar with the Scalf model? A few people probably. Yeah? Okay, it's really brilliant, and leaders get it really quickly. So if you want to know more about neuroscience, this is the place to start. I'm just touching on that because I'm going into stuff around healthy mind, but I think it's important that you get at least an overview of this. So the basic tenet of this is what I mentioned earlier, which is all about threat and reward. The brain scans constantly for threat. Every 5 seconds, it's looking for threat. What's the problem? When we meet people, do we like them? Are they similar to us? Are they different? Are they threatening in some way? And it was designed to protect us. So it's that thing about running away from saber-toothed tigers. Our brains scan for anything that might hurt us. Threat is much bigger than reward. So we all know that engagement strategies and reward programs, recognition programs work, but this is one of those areas where I don't think, certainly I didn't know, how important it is. That actually you do need to build more and more recognition in order to counteract the effect of threat that people experience on a daily basis. And it can be tiny things that trigger people. We move away from threat and we move towards reward. So if you're losing someone and you're having a conversation, a feedback conversation, can I give you some feedback? That instantly creates a threat for a lot of people. And, you know, the millennials that in the previous presentation, they do like feedback, but they want it sort of naturally in the moment. They don't like being sort of caught and said, I need to give you some feedback, any more than sort of ancient people like me. It's setting people up to feel comfortable with feedback is really important. So what's the Scalf model all about? Well, Scalf stands for status, is the first. And this isn't, I like to drive flashy cars and wear nice suits. Status is about how do I rate myself against other people. And when I spoke in November, we did a little exercise where we made paper aeroplanes. And I asked people what was going on in your head when you were making it. And we got all sorts of things about, I'm rubbish at making planes, you know, I can't remember how to do it, his is better than mine flew better than his. All sorts of thoughts were going on in people's brains about making a paper aeroplane. So if you apply that into the workplace, there's all sorts of opportunities to be looking, how do I rate against all these other people? And that's where sort of things like performance management actually set you up to have a difficult reaction. Because especially if you've got a forced curve, you're saying, you know, these people are better than you or worse than you. And it suits some cultures. You know, you're never going to get away from it in banking because they like to have competition and fight with each other and feel better. But when I was head of HR in a bank, we had to get rid of 25% of our people in the credit crunch. And once you've lost 25% of your people, you don't have anything left that isn't really, really good, because we hired the best people to begin with. Then your criteria allows for getting rid of the people who maybe are not that brilliant. And then how do you explain to someone who was at the top of the curve last year that they're now at the bottom through nothing other than there's nobody left who's worse than you? It's a really hard conversation to have, and I found it difficult. Not to mention my own, you know. C stands for certainty, and this comes up a lot in change situations where there is no certainty. And what's important there is that you look for opportunities to give people certainty even in uncertain times. So if I take the credit crunch again, what happened was the senior leadership disappeared. It was so bad the finance director couldn't close the books. So we were in a situation where the CEO disappeared and played golf because he didn't want to talk to his people because he was scared that he couldn't answer the questions. He would not have said that at the time, but that is what was going on. And it wasn't just our bank, it was all the banks. Everybody was very afraid. And one of the things I found was that by saying to people, look, I can't tell you everything, I don't know the answers to everything anyway, but I will turn up every Monday and you can ask me what you want to ask me, and I will answer to the best of my ability. That in the brain, as far as this threat response, gives certainty, it calms it a bit. The next one is autonomy. How much control do we like? £5 fine. The fourth one is relatedness. How valued do we feel? How much connectivity is there between us and others? So if you take an example of being left off a distribution list or not invited to a meeting, somebody with high relatedness needs will take that personally. They will feel you don't like me or you don't value me, or in some way it's personal. Somebody with high status needs with the same situation would be offended. It's like, do you know who I am? Why am I not in that meeting? And it could just be someone forgot. And this is these little tiny triggers that can create threat in the brain. And finally, fairness. And fairness is all about how big is my share of the pie, rather than actual value. So, you know, research that we've done on this, it's got nothing to do with how much. So if you look at bonuses, people like to get their bonuses, but often it's less important how much the bonus is, rather than how much did he or she get compared to me, because it's that sort of status thing. And these all trip together. So, you know, you can hit one domain and it will hit others. Fairness often goes with other domains. There's loads on Scalf that I could talk about for hours, but you get the idea that there are these stress triggers that create threat responses, and they close us down to learning. If you are going to appraise people in any way, you want them in a growth mindset. So if anyone wants to know more about that, you want the work of Carol Dweck. Fixed mindset people think they know everything, there's nothing more they can learn. Growth mindset people, very open to feedback, want to know more, want to act on it. The problem is if they get into a threat response, even normally growth mindset people go into a fixed state. So with people, it's all about this, keeping them in a positive, what we call toward state. Oh yeah, stress actually shrinks our brain networks, so we have less sort of resources to work with. So trying to mitigate your own stress in the organization is really important. This is a well-known piece of research which basically tells us that we need moderate stress to perform. If we just sit and chant on a mountaintop, we're not very motivated to work. It might be pleasant, but we're not actually going to have peak performance. Too much stress and you start getting anxious and start getting very disorganized. I know that when I start losing my keys and forgetting things and overlooking detail, it's probably because I've been flying too much, trying to learn things and doing too much, cognitive overload. So you're looking for moderate stress. So giving people stretch targets, giving them things that will take them outside of their comfort zone is good, as long as they're in a reward state. Okay, so that's just about, it's really how you react to stress that is important, not how much stress you're facing. So people in war zones, Marines and things, they're very stressful places to be, but they're trained and they stay calm and they know how to react. In corporations, it can feel like a war zone, but we don't have the capability to self-regulate. This is what I was talking about earlier, the ventrolateral prefrontal cortex. That lives in the PFC. You need to take action very quickly. There are 3 ways that you can get around that: labeling, reappraisal, and mindfulness training. And the first one is labeling. Labeling is a separate topic in itself, but it's basically about working out what is going on for me, what is causing this. So Scalf is a way. There's various elements that you can do to give yourself an idea of what's going on. And when they put people in scanners and put them under stress and help them work out what's stressing them, the limbic system kind of goes, oh, okay, it's that, and it calms. And it really does work. My doctoral process was around labeling. I didn't know it at the time because I did it before I knew about neuroscience. But when I actually learned about it, I realized, oh, my process is actually a labeling process. And I know that it takes people through a process that helps them identify what's going on for them. So when you're trying to emotionally regulate, you can choose to not engage. So say you're scared of presenting. You actually can choose not to do it, get someone else to do it. You can not think about it, attention deployment. But once you start to feel the emotions, you don't have many choices. So you can either express it, and it's not much fun being around someone who's crying or angry and raging at you. You can suppress it, but you do notice when somebody's got emotion going on and they're suppressing it, can't you? You can see it. So that's not a good idea either. The other option is cognitive change, how you see it differently. What do you see there? If you've seen it before, don't answer, but otherwise, does anyone see anything there? Oh. Little dog. And once you've seen it, you can't really unsee it, can you? It's there. And this is just reappraisal. It's actually seeing things differently. By seeing something differently, you can actually choose to make it a positive rather than a negative. So this is going to be a very quick run-through of the Healthy Mind Platter. There is an article I can send you on this, but these are the 7 things that you need to do that will help you to actually have a healthy brain. It came about after the Healthy Mind Platter, and I don't know if you remember, in the press there was stuff around diet, and it was like how much protein, how much carbs, how much fats you should have. And David thought, I wonder what it should be for The brain, what's the optimal elements for a healthy brain? And some of these elements have actually been proved to be more important than diet. So it doesn't cover diet, although there is research on healthy brain food. We don't cover that. That's a separate subject. But the first one is exercise. How many of you exercise? Okay, good. Great. Exercise doesn't just pump more oxygen around your body, although the PFC needs lots of oxygen to think. The more complex the thinking, the decision-making, the more oxygen-hungry the PFC gets. But it's also important because it's where we integrate memory and learning. So exercise provides all sorts of useful things, which you can read up there. This is going to be a very quick whiz through of the Healthy Mind Platter. This thing about it reducing depression and stress is very important. It really does help people to calm down, and people with behavioral problems, they're encouraged to exercise, and it helps inhibit unhelpful behaviors. The next one is focus time. Have I got time? I've got till 25 to. Right, I want you to do something, but you have to do it fast for me because we haven't got long and you're probably all getting a bit sort of exhausted after breakfast. So I'd like you all, if you have a mobile phone, contrary to normal presentations, I want you to pick it up without switching it on at the moment. And then I'd like you to stand up. And I would like you to shuffle forward to halfway, just come to the front of the room as far as you can. Come on, you can go quicker than that. Quick, forward. Okay, now, it's going to be difficult because there's a lot of you and there's lots of tables, but what I want you to do is walk to the other end of the room as fast as you can, just holding your phones, don't look at them. Walk to the other end of the room, fast, come on. You can go quicker, come on, push it. Be safe, walk fast. This works better without the tables. Okay, well that wasn't very fast, was it? That was pretty much like snail's pace. Who was looking at their mobile phones whilst they were walking to the back? Anyone? Go on, admit it, there's no penalty. No. Okay, what I want you to do now is switch your mobile phones on and start looking at your texts or your emails and walk as fast as you can to this end of the room whilst you're looking at your mobile phones. Okay, so I'm going to carry on whilst the rest of you make it. Not an ideal room, but who found it was exactly the same, made no difference whether they were looking at their phones or not? Okay. That is not usual. Who found it took longer? Yeah, the majority. Basically, no one can multitask. You can all sit down now, thank you very much. And when you have a freer space, it's much more obvious because you can walk really fast to the back of the room, whereas this way, you're kind of a bit constrained. But basically, we all think that we can multitask. But what we've found is, through our research, is that every time, if you have those little pop-ups when an email comes through, you basically can't, it takes about 15 minutes to get back into focused strategic work. Who does their focus work like strategy planning or something that they really need to focus and think about at work? Or who does it at work? Who plans time for it? Okay. Who does it in the evenings or at weekends when they've got peace and quiet and they can just get on with it? Yeah. More people. I do it too. When I've got to really think about things, if I'm running through some slides or designing something, I tend to do it in my time. And the best time to do focused work is actually early in the day, early in the week. By about Thursday, Friday, your brains are pretty fried. So it's really important to have focus time built into your day. Anybody feel that they're a night person and that doesn't work? Some people are, but they're in the minority. Most people don't plan time and protect it to the same degree for focused planning as they would, say, a meeting with their CEO. And when I'm coaching people, that's what I always say to them. Protect your focus time as if it was a meeting with your CEO, because you wouldn't move that, would you? And they'll go, no, I wouldn't. So it's just as legitimate to do that as anything else. And usually it's our time that goes in a diary when you're very pressured. There's a lot up there, but what's important? Yes, it actually this activity of the hippocampus and parts of the cortex is important. And there's just lots of areas of the brain that are engaged in focus because our brains weren't really designed to focus on the complexity that we now have to focus on. And if you engage those at peak times for your brain, you will be much more effective. Connecting time, we always thought that was a nice to have, but apparently it's a deep-seated need. People who are lonely die earlier than people who are well-connected with strong relationships, particularly significant other relationships of whatever form. I'm conscious of time. That was a very interesting study, the review of the social support. It's a number of medical systems that benefit just from connection. And the other study up there on oxytocin and social support, people were either given social support in a stressful situation or an oxytocin nasal spray or a combination of the two. And oxytocin is a happy hormone, basically, like dopamine. But the ones who had oxytocin and social support obviously did best, but social support was more effective than giving people drugs. And we see this time and again with different research that often the brain's social support ends up being more effective than giving people drugs. Excuse me. Playtime. Play seems like a bit arbitrary in work, but it's more and more people are recognizing how important it is. This is one of the areas where ADHD children, if people put them on programs of play, they do better than medicating them. There was a study with murderers where they actually looked at their childhood and said, how much play did they get? And every single one in this study had either abnormal play, where they were hurting animals or other children, or they had no play at all. I had a coaching client that was a sales director, and his CEO said, he's sort of intense. He needs to lighten up a bit. He's not very salesy. So I coached him for a while, and it took a while for it to come up. But he eventually told me one day that he'd been a child chess prodigy. And at age 5, he was winning major competitions. And his grandfather used to stop him playing because he used to say, you've got a gift, you should be concentrating on chess, you shouldn't be out playing football. And so it had got so deeply wired into his unconscious that play is something you don't do, that he'd forgotten how to play at work. And when I ask questions of people in the audiences, who still plays, mostly it's people with children, because children still play, and we play with our kids. But building in time for play for no reason is really valuable. Some companies, I think Google was mentioned, and eBay, they have sort of table tennis, and they have games set up, games rooms, because it's really good for people. It stimulates creativity, and it helps people think differently in a really creative way. It's safe, risk-free. Downtime is something some of us think we don't have time for, but actually that's where integration occurs, where we need to, all the stresses and strains of a day can, having downtime, holidays, where you really have holidays, where you don't do emails all the way through, that you actually just chill. It's different to sport because that requires focus. Downtime is really important. Anyone not do downtime? No? Can't see anyone. Well, that's good. But a lot of people, particularly in sales environments, they don't do downtime. They're hyperactive. Not good for brains. Oh, those research things were, they were around the fact that when you've got a complex decision to do, it's important to just work on it to the point of where it feels like a struggle, and then go and do something different. Go out, play golf, whatever it is for you, walk your dogs, and it's likely that an insight will occur. And when they put people in lab conditions, they found that people who took the downtime approach actually outperformed pure analysts working on the problem because the unconscious mind became engaged. Time in is mindfulness. If anybody wants to practice mindfulness who's never tried it, at 3:30 this afternoon I'm going to do a very short mindfulness exercise, and you can have a go, but it's very important for stress and overcoming problems. I've got to speed up apparently, so that's what it covers. Sleep is probably the most important thing. If you don't sleep well, start looking at ways to help. All the other parts of the Healthy Mind Platter will help you with sleep. It really is where it's not an inactive process. It actually is very active in terms of learning. If you're sleep deprived, you might as well be drunk. That's the findings of one of our research projects. And have power naps. Power naps of between 10 and 20 minutes are the best in work time. And, people are like, well, you can't have naps in work time. Actually, you'd be more productive afterwards. If you sleep for longer than that, you need a lot longer because it's good for you, but it's like siesta culture. It takes longer to come out of it. 10 to 20 minutes, you don't go into deep sleep. You're still in REM sleep. Doesn't matter how many hours you need as long as you have what you need. So some people say I only need 4, some people say I need 10, but the average is 7.5. So what you are going to experience over the next 2 days is somewhat amounts of cognitive overload. Last time I did the conference, I think I was the second to last speaker, and everyone was sort of like, ugh. And they'd had a great time, and they were really engaged. They've met some great people and heard some great speakers, but they were exhausted. And if you can take any of these and go, you know what, I could go and take a power nap for 20 minutes in the lunch break, or I could just sit and be with myself, or I could go to Jacqui's mindfulness thing. Just take a moment and think about what, out of all those things, could I use when I'm feeling a bit sleepy, lethargic, or overloaded in the next 2 days. And then I think we've got a few minutes for questions, if anybody's got any questions they'd like to ask me.
So, any reflections? And I guess all of these sessions, it doesn't need to be a question because there's a lot of knowledge in the room. So it's not just sort of up to the stage and back. If you've got something you'd like to share, then please reach out. We have a gentleman over here. Do we have a microphone, Anissa? Oh, thank you.
Hi.
Hi.
So on the Playtime piece, I work in Silicon Valley, and very much a startup culture. I think it's required with every startup when you move into a new office space. It already comes with a ping pong table.
Yeah.
So how do you encourage that? Because in some cultures, it feels like if I go to play, I'm not working, and that's frowned upon. So how have you seen cultures within organizations reinforce that it's okay? It's okay to take a break. It's okay to play.
I think that's a really good question, and I think it is very cultural. It's that you see senior leaders playing for a start, so they're role modeling that it's okay. When I joined an investment bank, I think exercise is really important. So I went down to the gym at 11 o'clock one day when I was stuck on a problem. And there were 2 or 3 people from my team in the gym, and they pretty much fell off the running machines. They were like, God, she's in here, it's 11 o'clock. And and it was obvious, so I talked to them later, and I said, it's no problem, you regulating. I know that's exercise, not play. But I think part of it is role modeling. Part of it is having facilities, because the Silicon Valley, we've worked with eBay, Oakley, Adobe, lots of those big companies. The space is really important. What sort of environment is it? And is it Google that has the chutes where you can get in the chute at the top and whiz down instead of using stairs? It's all silly and it's fun. And the fact that they're there means it's encouraged. So it has to be cultural. But to be honest with you, if you work in an investment bank, it's not going to be cultural. And maybe you don't fit if that's what you want. I didn't fit banking. It wasn't my thing, really. And I remember somebody saying to me, a young girl, should I join an IT startup in Silicon Valley, or should I go to a consultancy? She was a grad. And I said, what sort of person are you? Because not everyone wants to play. So it's really cultural. So I don't think there's a magic silver bullet, but it's really just environment and role play of senior leaders. Does that answer you? I don't know. Okay.
Any other questions? Yes, over here.
I went to a talk with Edward de Bono recently, and he was talking about sort of similar areas of the importance of sleep. Mm-hmm. And then he asked the audience, he said, so what is the one thing that keeps you awake at night? Mm-hmm. And I didn't answer it, but my answer was lacking sleep keeps me awake at night.
Yes, you worry about not sleeping.
I worry literally about not sleeping, and then that keeps me awake because it makes me less productive. So what's the way of breaking out of that cycle?
You need to look at the work of Jacqui Payne. She's our main neuroscientist on sleep. She has a great website with lots of resources, but a lot of things around setting yourself up for a good night's sleep, not using devices. Mindfulness training, I would say, is probably the most useful, because it calms the brain. Doing something different. If you know your brain's whirring, you need to sort of, labeling can help. Actually, what's going on? What is it I'm worried about? And then I encourage people to have a notebook by the bed and just write down what's running, so that you're kind of emptying it out of your brain. It's really hard, sleep, but exercise so you're tired. Don't drink alcohol because it makes you sleepy, but you have poor quality sleep. I know sometimes if I tend to have wine each evening, and if I go on a bit of a detox, I find it hard to sleep because the wine normally makes me a bit sleepy. And it's kind of, don't do that, don't exercise near bedtime, have a warm, not a hot bath. It's all those sort of things, but really lying awake, worrying about not sleeping will make it worse. Do a mindfulness tape, put one on, and just take yourself through a process of relaxation, and hopefully that will help you. Jacqui Payne, look up Jacqui Payne, she's brilliant.
Okay, we have time for one more question over here.
Hi, Jacqui.
Hi.
What do we know about the neuroscience behind burnout?
The neuroscience behind burnout. That's a very big question. Can you be a bit more specific about what you mean?
Do we understand what happens to the brain during burnout, and can people fundamentally recover their brain function that would help support them going forwards?
Yeah, sure. I mean, basically, it's the cognitive overload situation. We put people in scanners, and you can see different neural activity around ventrolateral part of the brain and the striatum. They do recover, yeah. It's not, as long as there's no deep-seated psychological problems. The neuroscientists would say that social pain is like physical pain. Matt Lieberman wrote a lot about this in his book, Social. Basically, it's like breaking your leg. If you are suffering extreme burnout, you are suffering just as much as if you've been run over and broken your leg. However, it's not so visible. You don't get the same level of emotional care from other people. You tend to pull yourself together, what's the matter with you? but you do recover with the right care. So it's really about taking them out of the environment that is causing burnout and giving them time to do all those things on the Healthy Mind Platter, rather than sending them off to the Priory. I don't know if you have the Priory, but it's a sort of private clinic that charges masses of money to rehabilitate people who've burnt out in organisations. And they medicate you. From the moment you walk through the door, you're medicated, which, you know, it has its place, and psychologists do a good job, but actually those basic things that you can do for yourself, if people have time out, downtime, start socializing, play, exercise, all those things will help rebuild. It's just as rebuildable in a normal person as a physical injury. It highlights the same bit of the brain.
Jacqui, I think we're going to have to call time there, so thank you very much.